Imagine you're in the year 1990. You wake up early, make yourself some coffee, and then go to work as usual. But something is different today. As you walk through the city, it's not just the streets that seem new. Everything around you seems different. Your country looks different. It feels different. It seems like your entire reality has changed overnight. This isn't the plot of a sci-fi movie. It's what actually happened to someone if you were living in East Germany in 1990. In less than a year, the Berlin Wall had come down, and East and West Germany had reunited. But this dramatic event didn't happen in a vacuum. It was preceded by a series of big and small changes, many of which seemed completely random. And one of these bizarre events was a major coffee shortage that happened in the 1970s. But how did a mundane thing like coffee almost destroy a country? That's what we'll find out today. From 1954 onwards, coffee became a rare commodity in East Germany. Imports from the Soviet Union stopped completely, and East Germany was on its own. In the beginning, they could still get some coffee from Western allies, but those supplies soon dwindled as well. By the end of the 1950s, people in East Germany could only buy low-quality, heavily processed coffee, which tasted nothing like the high-quality Arabica beans people had enjoyed before the war. But by the 1960s, the situation had improved somewhat. People could afford basic necessities like food and clothing. So they started spending money on luxuries like tobacco, sweets, alcohol, and of course, coffee. And this was quite problematic for the socialist government. Since unlike in capitalist countries, where private businesses compete to offer the best products at the lowest prices, in communist countries, private enterprise was non-existent. If the government wanted to sell coffee or any other good, they had to do it directly. The problem was, they weren't very good at it. The government couldn't keep up with demand, and prices continued to rise. By the 1970s, East Germans spent almost 4 times more money on coffee than they did on shoes. And even worse, the quality of the coffee continued to decline. Although there were some high-quality blends available, they were often tainted with low-quality ingredients to increase profits. Then, in 1977, disaster struck. Brazil, the world's largest coffee exporter, experienced a devastating harvest failure. Prices skyrocketed, and suddenly East Germany was forced to spend 700 million West German marks on coffee alone, almost 5 times their regular annual budget. Today, that's equivalent to over $300 million or $1.56 billion. This was unacceptable. And so the government took drastic measures. They banned the sale of cheap coffee blends, and soon after, all coffee-flavored ersatz products as well. These desperate attempts to control coffee consumption wouldn't last long. East Germany's total expenditure on coffee exceeded their combined expenditures on food, clothing, household items, and all other necessities. So clearly, something had to change. Now, for some brief context here, the 1970s was a turbulent period for East Germany. After the relative calm of the previous decade, tensions were rising once again. The government faced internal opposition, and they were already struggling to keep the peace. Then oil prices spiked during the energy crisis of the 1970s, which threw the economy into turmoil. On top of this, their biggest trading partner, the Soviet Union, was becoming increasingly unreliable. Things came to a head when the government made a fateful decision to restrict the import of food, everyday luxuries, and special items. In order to conserve foreign currency, the government hoped this would alleviate some of the strain on their finances. But the impact was immediate and severe. Shortages of basic commodities rocked the nation, sparking outrage and resentment among the populace. But the authorities remained steadfast in their position. Officials argued that these restrictions were temporary, and necessary sacrifices must be made for the greater good of the nation. However, the people saw things differently. For them, these shortages were yet another example of the government's incompetence and their inability to provide for the basic needs of their citizens. As always, the government assumed that people would accept their sacrifice without complaint, but they underestimated the depth of people's frustration and their attachment to everyday luxuries. Restrictions on coffee, cigarettes, alcohol, and sweets sparked widespread anger and resentment. People felt that the government was encroaching on their personal lives and taking away the small pleasures that made life bearable under communism. And so, the situation spiraled out of control. Protests erupted across the nation. People took to the streets demanding an end to the shortages and the return of their beloved luxuries. The government responded with force, cracking down on protesters and arresting those who dared to defy their authority. The streets of East Germany became battlegrounds as citizens clashed with police and the military. It was a defining moment in the nation's history, a turning point that foreshadowed the dramatic events that would unfold just a few years later. During this turbulent time, a group of highly placed East German officials hatched a daring plan to tackle the coffee crisis, an audacious gamble that would take them to the other side of the world. In the heart of Vietnam, thousands of miles away from the turmoil of East Germany, the plan was simple, yet monumental. Invest heavily in coffee production, secure a substantial portion of the harvest, and bring it back home. But there was a catch. Robusta coffee plants take 8 years to mature and begin yielding beans. This meant that the first significant harvest wouldn't be ready until 1990, a full 13 years after the initial investment. Nevertheless, the East German leadership pressed forward. They forged alliances, signed contracts, and embarked on a mission to transform the landscape of Vietnam's coffee industry. Little did they know that this venture would soon have profound implications for both nations and the global coffee market as a whole. What followed was a massive construction project in rural Vietnam. Over the next few years, East Germany poured tens of millions of dollars into the project, training thousands of workers and building factories, houses, and even entire villages. It was a Herculean effort that transformed the region and set the stage for Vietnam's future as a major player in the coffee industry. Fast forward to 1990, and the situation had changed dramatically. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent reunification of Germany had left East Germany no more. And with it, the massive coffee project that had seemed like such a promising solution to the communist era's dwindling coffee supply now seemed like a relic of a bygone era. Yet amidst all this change, one thing remained constant: the coffee. In 1990, the first harvest of Robusta coffee was ready for picking in Vietnam. But there was no East Germany to receive it. The ironic twist of fate left the Vietnamese with a valuable commodity and a mystery. Where was their biggest customer? Why had the massive contracts been cancelled overnight? The answer lay in the dramatic events that had unfolded just a few months earlier, the peaceful revolution that had swept through East Germany and reshaped the nation forever. The people had won, but the price was steep. And as the dust settled, they realized that their victory came at the expense of their country's history. In a single stroke, the intricate web of relationships and agreements that had sustained East Germany for decades was torn apart. Gone were the days of trading partners, reliable suppliers, and old alliances. Instead, there was a new Germany, reunified and looking towards the future. But this new beginning came at a cost. All the carefully laid plans of the past, including the ambitious coffee project in Vietnam, were now nothing but memories. The first harvest was ready, but there was no buyer. And so a new chapter began in the history of coffee. Today, Vietnam stands as the world's second largest coffee producer, trailing only Brazil. The legacy of East Germany's involvement lives on in the bustling coffee fields and factories, a testament to a bygone era of international cooperation. But what about the coffee itself? It didn't disappear after 1990. No, it found new markets, new customers, and new life. And so the story of East Germany's ill-fated coffee quest ends not with a whimper, but with a quiet irony. Their desperate bid to secure a steady supply of coffee resulted in the very thing that sealed their fate: a robust coffee industry in Vietnam that continues to thrive to this day.